You're about to learn why your brain feels anxiety at all, why it developed this ability in the first place, and what it's truly trying to do when it floods you with tension, unease, or dread. It's not malfunctioning, it's doing something ancient, something essential, and understanding this changes everything. Anxiety exists because at some point in your evolutionary history, it saved your life. Your ancestors survived not just by reacting to threats, but by anticipating them, by imagining possible futures where danger might arise. The brain's ability to forecast problems became a superpower, and with it came a kind of inner signal, a whisper of tension, urging caution, preparation, escape. This signal is what we now call anxiety. Not a flaw, not a defect, but a feature designed to keep you safe. Imagine yourself walking alone through a forest long ago. You hear a crack of a branch behind you. Your heart begins to race. Your muscles tense. Your hearing sharpens. Every system in your body prioritizes alertness because the next few seconds might decide whether you survive. This reaction is your sympathetic nervous system turning on like a spotlight. But even before the sound, you were listening. You were scanning. You were anticipating. That's the essence of anxiety. It's not fear. Fear responds to something immediate, something known. A tiger leaping from the bushes, a car swerving toward you. That's fear. But anxiety is what happens before. The scanning, the imagining, the preparation for a danger that hasn't yet come. Your brain developed anxiety, not to torture you, but to protect you. And for a long time, it worked. But today, you don't face tigers. You face emails, social interactions, bills, uncertainty. You live in a world where most threats aren't immediate, but abstract and ongoing, and your brain, still wired for danger, treats them like predators hiding in the brush. The same systems designed to help you run from a lion now activate when your phone buzzes with a difficult message, when you imagine rejection before it happens. When you think about the future and feel your breath tighten, your body prepares for action, but there's no enemy to fight, no forest to flee from. So the energy stays trapped, it spirals inward, it turns preparation into paralysis. That's anxiety's paradox. What once saved you can now overtake you, a guardian turned captor. And yet, even now, anxiety is still trying to help. It believes it's keeping you ready, aware, one step ahead. But to understand how it operates, to truly see it, you must follow it deeper, into the networks of your brain that give it form. You'll meet the structures that set the alarm, the chemicals that flood your system, the loops that feed anticipation, and the ways your mind learns, over time, what to expect from the world. Because while anxiety may be rooted in survival, it is shaped by experience, by memory, by pattern. But before we explore those pathways, let's linger one more moment on this idea that anxiety is not your enemy. It is a messenger, a system built with care, even if now it misfires. And like all messages, it can be understood, not silenced, but heard, felt, and eventually softened. But to do that, you'll need to distinguish it from its sharper cousin, fear. Because where fear ends, anxiety begins. To understand anxiety clearly, you must separate it from fear, not just in words, but in how your brain actually processes them. Though they feel similar, they arise from different rhythms and serve different roles. This difference is subtle, yet essential. Fear is immediate. It strikes like lightning. It is tied to something you can name, point at, escape from. A sudden sound in the dark, the snap of a dog's jaws, a car swerving into your lane. In those moments, your body reacts swiftly and without question. Your pupils dilate, your heart pounds, your muscles brace. This is fear's domain, acute, urgent, and linked to survival. Anxiety, on the other hand, is the shadow of fear. It hovers not over what is, but over what might be. It emerges in the space between now and later. It thrives on uncertainty. Unlike fear, anxiety is rarely about a clear threat. Instead, it circles possibilities. What if I fail? What if they leave me? What if something goes wrong? This difference between reacting to what is and anticipating what could be is not just philosophical. It plays out in different circuits of the brain. Fear lives in the moment, anchored in the amygdala's fast primal responses. Anxiety, meanwhile, draws upon memory, imagination, prediction. It requires a more complex network, one that links past experiences with future simulations. Picture your mind like a theatre. Fear is the sudden alarm bell that interrupts the show, but anxiety is the scriptwriter backstage, imagining every possible ending before the play has even begun. And because the brain doesn't fully distinguish between imagined danger and real danger, your body still reacts. It still tenses, still pumps adrenaline, still shortens your breath, even though the threat might only exist in your mind. This is why you can lie awake at night, feeling your chest tighten, your jaw clench, your thoughts spiral, even though nothing is happening, because to your brain, something might happen, and that possibility feels real enough. This anticipatory nature of anxiety also makes it more difficult to resolve. You can escape a tiger, you can avoid a car crash, but how do you escape an idea, a worry, a vague sense of impending difficulty? Anxiety can stretch on, precisely because it feeds on the uncertain, and the modern world, filled with open-ended stresses, constant information, and unclear outcomes, amplifies this uncertainty. You don't always know what's expected. You're flooded with comparisons, messages, and responsibilities. Your brain tries to keep up, to prepare, but without clear resolution, it loops. It asks again and again, what if? What then? What now? So your brain prepares, over and over, with no finish line in sight. That's the key difference. Fear ends. Anxiety lingers. Understanding this distinction helps loosen the grip. You begin to see anxiety not as a permanent state, but as a misfired attempt to protect you. It wants you ready. It thinks it's helping. But readiness without release becomes a prison. And so, to navigate anxiety, we must not only understand what it is, but how your brain prepares you for the unknown in the first place. What sets the system in motion? What lights the signal? To answer that, we must explore your brain's internal alarm system, its sentinels, switches, and circuits. Because what feels like a single emotion is actually an orchestra of systems preparing for danger that hasn't yet arrived. Deep within your brain lies a network designed to keep you alive. It's ancient, precise, and astonishingly fast. This is your internal alarm system, always watching, always ready. And when anxiety begins, it's this system that whispers first. It doesn't ask for your permission. You don't decide to feel on edge. The signal rises from below consciousness, an echo from older times, when survival depended on noticing the smallest shift in your environment. This alarm system is not a single part of the brain, but a tightly connected web. The amygdala sits at its core, alert to emotional salience. The hypothalamus links emotion to bodily response. The brainstem sends signals to the heart and lungs. The insula registers bodily sensations, and the thalamus filters incoming sensory data, light, sound, touch, deciding what gets passed on and what doesn't. Think of this network like a lighthouse on a rocky shore. It scans, it notices, it prepares. And when a possible danger appears, even a whisper of it, it lights up. This is not always bad. In fact, most of the time, it's helpful. You cross the street more carefully because something felt off. You pause before sending that message. You feel an unease that later proves justified. The alarm kept you safe. But this system isn't just fast. It's also biased toward caution, toward overreacting, because the cost of a false alarm is low. If your brain warns you and it turns out to be nothing, you survive. But if it misses something truly dangerous, the cost is high. so it errs on the side of too much. It's a system built on suspicion. Anxiety arises when this suspicion turns chronic, when the alarm rings not for real threats, but for imagined ones, when it doesn't stop ringing, even when everything around you seems fine. You feel your body responding, shallow breaths, tense shoulders, a racing heart. These are not just in your head, they're physiological signals, part of a coordinated plan to protect you. Even though there's no enemy, your brain primes your body as if one's near. And because you feel it in your body, your mind looks for reasons. Why am I tense? Why do I feel off? The brain doesn't like loose ends, so it creates stories, narratives to match the signal. Something must be wrong, and the spiral begins. This system can also be shaped by experience. If you've been hurt before, emotionally, physically, relationally, your brain learns. It memorizes the patterns that preceded pain, and later, when something similar happens, even distantly, the alarm fires faster. It doesn't think, it reacts. This learned sensitivity is called sensitization, and while it once helped you avoid repeat harm, over time it can trap you in a loop where anything remotely similar feels unsafe. Even kindness, even silence, even rest. Because once the alarm becomes hypersensitive, it sounds even when you're safe. And the more it sounds, the more your brain thinks you're in danger. So it reinforces the wiring. The alarm becomes self-sustaining. But remember this, the system is not broken, it is overactive, and what fires together can also quiet together. By understanding the components of this system, the amygdala, the thalamus, the insula, and more, you gain a map, a way to navigate not just the symptoms of anxiety, but its roots. Because anxiety isn't just a feeling, it's a series of activations, precise, measurable, and modifiable. And at the heart of it all is one key structure, one tiny sentinel that sounds the bell before you even know why you feel what you feel. It's time now to meet the amygdala, the spark at the center of your emotional flame, tucked deep within your temporal lobe, smaller than an almond. The amygdala watches everything. It's always on, always scanning, always ready to react. And when anxiety begins, it's often the amygdala that fires first, long before you realize anything is wrong. The amygdala is one of the oldest parts of your emotional brain. It evolved to help animals survive by rapidly detecting danger and triggering responses. Its job is not to understand, but to signal this could be bad. When it detects something, an expression, a tone, a flicker of uncertainty, it sends out an alert, not just to your mind, but to your entire body. It tells the hypothalamus to ready your stress response, tells your muscles to tighten, tells your heart to beat faster. It does this without asking you. But here's the catch. The amygdala isn't good with context. It doesn't analyze. It doesn't wait. It doesn't reason. It reacts based on pattern, association, and memory. If something looks, sounds, or feels even vaguely like a past threat, it can sound the alarm. Imagine walking into a room where, once, years ago, something unpleasant happened. You may not even remember it consciously, but the amygdala does. It notices the lighting, the smell, the temperature, tiny details that match its stored memory, and suddenly your chest tightens. You feel on edge, but you can't say why. That's how the amygdala works. It prepares you to act before you even know what you're reacting to. In anxiety, this system becomes hyperactive. The amygdala begins to see threat everywhere, not just in obvious places, but in neutral faces, ambiguous statements, even quiet moments. It assumes something will go wrong, and so it readies you. You may find yourself anticipating criticism that never comes, feeling danger in safe spaces, avoiding experiences not because they're harmful, but because your body reacts as if they might be. That's the amygdala's power. It colors your entire perception, and it's shaped deeply by your past experiences, of neglect, rejection, humiliation, or trauma leave imprints, not just in memory, but in reactivity. The amygdala becomes trained. It overgeneralizes. It starts to fire for smaller and smaller cues. Like a smoke detector that beeps at steam from the shower, it starts to warn you even when there's no real fire. Yet this doesn't mean it's permanent. The amygdala can change. It can relearn safety, but not through logic, not through willpower, because the amygdala doesn't respond to thought. It responds to experience, especially repeated experience. It needs to feel safety, not just hear about it. It needs patterns of calm, moments of groundedness to form new associations. That's why practices like deep breathing, mindfulness, and exposure-based therapies work. They create signals of safety. They give the amygdala new data. This is okay, this is safe, and slowly the volume of the alarm lowers. Still, the amygdala doesn't work alone. It listens to other regions, especially those that track how your body feels inside. Because sometimes the alarm doesn't start with a thought or a memory. It starts with a sensation, a flutter in your chest, a shift in your breath, a twist in your gut. To understand this next layer, we must look at the insula, the silent interpreter of inner sensation, the bridge between feeling and knowing. Imagine sitting quietly, doing nothing in particular, when a faint tension arises in your chest. Perhaps your stomach shifts, your breath shortens slightly. You weren't thinking anything threatening, yet something within you changes. That subtle shift is often the insula's whisper. The insula is a region of your brain responsible for interoception, your ability to sense the internal state of your body. It tracks everything: heartbeat, digestion, respiration, temperature, not consciously, but constantly. It informs you whether you feel safe or threatened, sometimes before you even know why. When you feel anxiety as a gut feeling, that's the insula in motion. It doesn't generate anxiety by itself, but it acts like a translator, converting physical changes into emotional awareness. It bridges your body and mind. If your heart rate climbs, if your breath becomes shallow, if your muscles tense, the insula notices. It compares those signals to patterns from the past, and if they resemble a previous state of fear, it can send an internal message: this feels familiar, this might not be safe. That message then activates other parts of the brain, the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus. Anxiety spreads. But the process often starts with a sensation, a flicker of unease in your body, noticed and amplified. In this way, anxiety can become a loop. A physical sensation creates a mental response, which heightens physical tension, which in turn deepens the mental response. The insula sits at the heart of this cycle, interpreting each shift, feeding back into the system. This is why people with high anxiety often become acutely aware of their bodily states. They notice their breath, their pulse, the tiniest flutter of discomfort, and interpret it as a signal that something is wrong. The body becomes a source of perceived threat. And once your brain begins scanning your inner world for danger, it finds patterns. A skipped heartbeat becomes something's wrong. A stomach twist becomes I'm in danger. And these interpretations gain strength with repetition. The insula, once neutral, starts flagging more and more sensations as warnings. Over time, this sensitivity reshapes experience. Neutral bodily states feel unsafe. Moments of stillness become suspicious. The calm before the storm feels like the storm itself. Yet this sensitivity can also be rewired. Because the insula, like much of the brain, is plastic, it learns from repeated patterns. Practices that promote calm, like slow breathing, progressive relaxation, and gentle movement, send different data. They teach the insula. This pattern means safety. Over time, the brain learns to reinterpret bodily signals in less threatening ways. You begin to feel a quickened heart without panic, a sudden breath without alarm, a tight chest without the assumption of collapse. That's the quiet power of working with the body. It speaks the insula's language. But the insula doesn't work alone. It listens to what your senses perceive. It receives filtered information from another vital structure, one that decides what information reaches consciousness and what gets pushed aside. This gatekeeper is the thalamus, and when it tilts toward anxiety, it can shape your entire perception of the world. Let's now explore how the thalamus filters reality and how it might be showing you only what your brain already fears. Think of your brain as a vast control room with countless signals coming in from your senses: sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. Amid this sensory storm, there's a filter, a silent processor, deciding which signals get through and which don't. That filter is the thalamus. Every second, it receives input from your environment: a flicker of light, the tone of a voice, the breeze against your skin. It processes these fragments and decides what gets passed along to your conscious awareness. It's not a simple relay station, it's a curator of experience. In moments of calm, the thalamus distributes information evenly. It lets you see a full picture. You notice beauty, texture, subtlety. But in states of anxiety, its preferences change. The filter narrows. It begins to prioritize threat. Even minor signals, a neutral facial expression, a distant sound, a vague shape in the periphery, can be flagged as important. And as those threat-colored signals move upward through the brain, your perception of the world begins to tilt. You don't just see reality, you see what your brain is looking for. This is how anxiety reshapes attention. It's not only that your thoughts become more fearful, it's that your sensory system starts seeking confirmation of those fears. The thalamus starts feeding the amygdala a steady stream of potentially troubling information. And once the amygdala is primed, it keeps asking for more. This cycle explains why anxious minds often notice details others miss. A tiny sigh during a conversation, a minor shift in tone, a passing glance. To an anxious brain, these are not background noise. They're possible signs of disapproval, threat, rejection. The thalamus is also deeply connected to your memory systems. So if a particular sound or smell is linked to a painful experience, even unconsciously, it may prioritize that input, feeding it forward as a warning. This is why sometimes a completely benign moment can feel charged or ominous, even when you can't explain why. In anxiety, the thalamus becomes a spotlight operator, casting all its light on what might go wrong, and what it illuminates, you experience as your reality. But it's important to remember, the filter can shift, the spotlight can move. Just as experience shapes perception, perception shapes experience. When you begin to intentionally focus on signals of safety, like soothing sounds, warmth, gentle textures, you're not ignoring danger, you're expanding the filter. You're giving your thalamus new data, that the world also contains calm, not just threat. Practices like grounding exercises, mindful observation, and sensory meditation help train the brain to widen the lens. You begin to notice not just what could harm you, but what sustains you. Because your thalamus is not static, it adapts to what you repeatedly pay attention to. In this way, anxiety is not just a matter of thoughts or feelings. It's also about what your brain lets you perceive in the first place. And this perception links directly to another crucial player, your prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain that makes sense of it all. It builds the stories, it imagines the future, it decides what you should do next. But when this logical brain becomes hijacked by anxious signals, it doesn't soothe, it strategizes, it plans, loops, and worries. Let's now step into the command center of worry, the prefrontal cortex, and see how it turns fleeting sensations into persistent narratives. At the front of your brain, behind your forehead, sits the prefrontal cortex, a region as thoughtful as the amygdala is reactive. It's the architect of logic, the planner of futures, the storyteller of self. It weighs options, imagines outcomes, decides what's right or wrong. When you feel anxious, it's easy to assume this part of the brain would calm you down. After all, it's rational. It should assess the situation and tell you everything's fine. But in reality, when anxiety arises, the prefrontal cortex often does the opposite. It doesn't quiet the storm. It gives it shape, narrative, direction. Imagine the amygdala sounds an alarm. Something feels off. The insula tracks a racing heart. The thalamus highlights a raised eyebrow or a strange silence. These inputs rise toward the prefrontal cortex, seeking interpretation. And so your logical brain begins its work, not by dismissing the signal, but by explaining it. It says maybe she's upset with me, or what if I made a mistake, or this might all go wrong. It builds scenarios, crafts futures, replays past moments for clues. This is rumination, the looping analysis that often follows anxiety. The prefrontal cortex spins a web of possibilities, not to trap you, but to protect you. It thinks that by rehearsing every angle, it can keep you safe. It tries to outthink uncertainty. But uncertainty cannot be solved like a puzzle. It can only be felt and survived. So the prefrontal cortex works over time, generating thought after thought, what if after what if, turning emotional discomfort into cognitive overload. You may find yourself rehearsing conversations that never happened, replaying minor errors as if they were disasters, planning escape routes for situations that may never arise. This is not because you're irrational. It's because your rational brain is flooded with emotional signals, and it's trying earnestly to manage them. Yet this constant strategizing drains your energy. It fragments attention. It reinforces the idea that something must be wrong, because why else would you be thinking so much? And so, the prefrontal cortex doesn't always relieve anxiety. It maintains it. It keeps the circuits active. It searches for control in situations where control doesn't exist. Still, this part of the brain is not your enemy. Its power lies in choice. When not overwhelmed, it helps you redirect attention, shift focus, break loops. It's the part of your mind that can say, I don't need to think about this right now. That's why practices that build cognitive flexibility, like journaling, thought labeling, or reframing, can be so effective. They give the prefrontal cortex a new task, not to solve the anxiety, but to contain it, to contextualize it. Over time, this region can learn to hold discomfort without spiraling into strategy. It can learn to say, I feel anxious, and that's okay. It can make space. But when the emotional signals grow too loud, even this wise part of your mind must defer. That's when the body takes over. The heart races, the breath shortens, muscles coil. You shift from thinking to reacting. You enter the stress response, the full body mobilization, designed to help you escape. To understand how this happens, we now follow anxiety from the brain into the body itself, because what begins in thought soon becomes sensation, and the body, once engaged, reshapes the mind in return. The moment your brain perceives threat, real or imagined, a chain of signals fires through your body with ancient precision. It begins with the hypothalamus, a small but powerful structure deep within your brain. In seconds, it sends a call to your pituitary gland, which signals your adrenal glands. Then, like an orchestra responding to its conductor, your body surges with hormones. Adrenaline is first. It rushes through your bloodstream, quickening your heart, dilating your pupils, tensing your muscles. You're being prepared, not gently, but urgently, for action. Next comes cortisol, the longer-lasting stress hormone. It keeps your system on high alert, keeps you vigilant, keeps you wired. This cascade is known as the stress response, often called fight or flight. But it's more than that. It's a total body mobilization, a redirection of all resources to survival. Your digestion pauses. Blood moves away from your stomach and skin toward your limbs. Your immune system slows. Your pain tolerance rises. Your breath grows shallow. Even your thoughts race, because hesitation in the eyes of your biology might cost you everything. In short, your body becomes a vessel for escape. And if you were in real danger, say confronted by a wild animal or fleeing a fire, this response could save your life. It has, countless times in our evolutionary past. But when anxiety triggers this system without external danger, the same changes occur. You feel your chest tighten, your breath rush, your hands sweat, not because something is happening, but because your brain believes something might happen. This is where anxiety becomes exhausting, because the body doesn't know the difference between what's imagined and what's real. It reacts the same way, and prolonged exposure to this state is taxing. When your nervous system is repeatedly pulled into high alert, it begins to shift its baseline. You might wake up tense, fall asleep with a racing mind, live in a body always ready to run. And the more often this happens, the more sensitized you become. Smaller triggers provoke bigger responses. A single email, a crowded room, a memory. Your sympathetic nervous system, the driver of this stress response, becomes dominant. Meanwhile, its counterpart, the parasympathetic system, which promotes calm and restoration, has fewer chances to lead. This imbalance wears on you. Sleep becomes shallow. Digestion falters. Inflammation rises. The body, meant to oscillate between alertness and recovery, leans toward chronic readiness. But readiness for what? Often nothing, or nothing immediate, only vague what-ifs without clear resolution. But there is a path out. Just as the brain can trigger the body can calm the brain. This is the promise of bottom-up strategies, approaches that use physical signals to reassure your nervous system that you are safe. Slow, rhythmic breathing stimulates the vagus nerve, activating the parasympathetic system. Gentle movement, walking, stretching, releases tension and signals completion. Even warm touch or soft light can shift your state. And over time, these inputs train your system to recalibrate, to respond less dramatically, to return to balance more quickly. You teach your body that safety is real, that stillness is not danger, that relaxation is not laziness, it's recovery. But before your system can unlearn these overreactions, it must first recognize them. In the next section, we'll explore how chronic anxiety reshapes perception itself, altering not just how you feel, but how you interpret the world around you. Because when your body remains in fight or flight, your mind begins to see danger even where none exists. As the stress response becomes more familiar to your system, something subtle yet powerful begins to change. Your perception of the world. The brain, now primed to scan for danger, begins filtering your reality through a lens of potential threat. This isn't a conscious decision. It's a shift deep within your perceptual circuitry, particularly in the thalamus, that quiet gatekeeper between your senses and your awareness. The thalamus acts like a security checkpoint, deciding which signals from the outside world deserve attention and which can be safely ignored. Under normal conditions, this system allows for balance. It lets you notice the smile on a stranger's face, the rustle of leaves in a breeze, or the warmth of the sun on your skin. But when anxiety sets the agenda, the thalamus begins to prioritize signs of danger. No matter how subtle, how rare, how unlikely, you become more likely to hear a sharp tone in someone's voice, even if none was intended. You fixate on the one unread message, the one ambiguous phrase. You walk into a room and notice who might disapprove rather than who welcomes you. This is known as attentional bias toward threat. It's a well-documented feature of anxiety, and it explains why even safe environments can feel tense or uncertain. Your brain has been trained by repeated experience or learned expectation to look first for what could go wrong. And the more often this filter is used, the stronger it becomes. Like a trail in a forest, the path of fear grows wider with use. This doesn't just affect how you interpret external events, it also shapes how you experience yourself. Anxious perception narrows your focus. It collapses your sense of the present into a tight corridor. You may forget what's going well. You may lose track of what's working. Your mind becomes a searchlight, scanning for the next problem, the next danger, the next misstep. In this state, it's harder to access your broader perspective. The part of you that knows things often turn out okay. That discomfort can pass, that not every silence means rejection. Your thoughts may become repetitive, circling the same concerns. This rumination isn't laziness or weakness, it's the brain's attempt to prepare, but preparation becomes paralysis when it's unending. Meanwhile, the thalamus feeds this loop by restricting what gets through. Positives are filtered out, reassurances feel weak, compliments don't land. Instead, ambiguity is interpreted negatively. A lack of reaction is assumed to be judgment. A delayed response becomes rejection. It's like trying to navigate life with a funhouse mirror for a lens, everything distorted toward danger. And yet it feels real, because your body confirms the threat. Your muscles are tense, your breath shallow, your heart racing. If I feel this way, your mind concludes, something must be wrong. But feelings are not always evidence, and in anxiety, they often arise from internal bias rather than external truth. So how do you begin to shift this bias? It starts with awareness. Gently noticing when your mind has narrowed, when your attention is locked on worst-case scenarios, asking without force, what else might be true here, or what am I not noticing? You can also train your attention, slowly through deliberate practice, noticing beauty, savoring calm, labeling safety. Each moment of attention, paid to what is not threatening, rewires the filter. It shows your brain that danger is not the only story. This takes time. The brain, especially under chronic stress, does not shift quickly, but with consistency, even the most vigilant mind can begin to open. And when it does, something remarkable happens. The world begins to feel different, not because it has changed, but because your perception has softened. From here, we can understand the emotional cost of this narrowed perception. It's not just what you miss externally, it's what you miss internally: peace, connection, trust. In the next section, we'll explore how your brain's tendency to imagine the worst-case scenario becomes a rehearsed habit, deepening anxiety even in the absence of real danger. Because the mind's predictions shape your experience, and when those predictions skew negative, the world can feel threatening even in its silence. When your brain begins to rehearse danger that hasn't happened, you enter a space where anxiety no longer depends on real-world cues. It feeds on possibility, prediction, and projection. The threat is no longer out there. It's in your mind, looping, refining, replaying. This is the core of anticipatory anxiety. It begins with a question: what if? What if I fail? What if they reject me? What if I lose everything? The mind isn't looking for answers, it's building simulations, and each one feels as vivid as the present moment, even though it's rooted in the unknown. This power of projection is part of what makes you human. Your brain evolved to imagine the future, to prepare for outcomes, to model actions before taking them. It's how we build, create, and survive. But in anxiety, this future-focused system becomes dysregulated. It begins rehearsing catastrophe, as if doing so could protect you from it. But instead of protecting, it often paralyzes. The brain doesn't distinguish sharply between what is vividly imagined and what is real. When you picture a conversation going wrong, When you replay the worst-case scenario in your mind, your body responds as though it's happening now. Your heart quickens, muscles tense, thoughts race. This is not just worry, it's embodied prediction, and it's exhausting. Over time, your system begins to anticipate that exhaustion. The day starts heavy. You wake with a tightness in your chest or a weight in your belly. Even before anything begins, your brain is already simulating failure. That's why mornings can be so difficult for anxious minds. Before the world arrives, your brain has already run its simulations. It's already lived through the fight, the conflict, the imagined judgment. And even when nothing bad happens, that rehearsal leaves a residue. You feel drained without knowing why. You've just fought battles that never took place. This anticipatory loop is often fueled by the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, a region deeply involved in evaluating uncertainty and potential outcomes. It acts like a sentinel, scanning for possible mistakes and urging you to prepare. But preparation becomes maladaptive when there's no end point, when there's nothing left to plan, and still the loop runs. This is especially common in social anxiety. A simple conversation can spark a flood of imagined outcomes. You see yourself saying the wrong thing, being misunderstood, laughed at, ignored. You play out every possible version over and over. And afterward, you may ruminate on the encounter, reanalyzing facial expressions, tone, pauses. You wonder if you were too much or not enough. And again, the simulations resume. It's like a director endlessly re-editing a scene that's already been filmed, hoping somehow to control a story that's already over or hasn't begun. But these simulations are not your fault. They're a feature of a protective system gone awry. A mind that loves you so much, it tries to keep you safe by preparing for every outcome, even if that safety comes at the cost of your peace. So what can you do? First, notice the loop, not with judgment, but with recognition. I'm rehearsing again. Name the pattern. You might say to yourself, this is my brain, trying to keep me safe. That shift turns the rehearsal from truth to habit. It loosens its grip. Second, return to the present. You can do this gently, through your breath, through your senses. Feel your feet on the ground, hear a sound in the distance. Anchor your attention in what is, not what might be. This doesn't mean dismissing real concerns. It means distinguishing between planning and looping, between preparation and paralysis. You can also ask yourself, is this scenario helpful to imagine? Is this concern something I can act on now? If not, you might thank your brain for its effort and invite it to rest. Because anxiety is not the enemy. It's a part of you that's working too hard. A sentinel who needs guidance, not shame. And when that guidance becomes gentle, consistent, and rooted in awareness, your brain begins to unlearn the habit of panic rehearsal. It begins to trust that not every silence is dangerous, not every unknown is doom. From here we begin to explore the threshold where anxiety stops serving and starts ruling. In the next section, we'll cross into the landscape of chronic tension, where adaptive responses become maladaptive patterns. Because it's not just what you fear that matters, it's how often your body is made to relive it. When the mind replays danger, the body keeps score. It stores the echo of each imagined threat, not just in memory, but in muscle, breath, posture. This is how anxiety becomes embodied. Chronic tension doesn't just come from what you do. It builds from what you prepare to do and never release. Every anxious thought is a command issued to your body. Brace, hold, be ready. And over time, that readiness becomes your baseline. You might not notice it at first, a slight tightness in the jaw, shoulders that never truly drop, a breath that ends too soon. But these are signs that your nervous system has learned to expect disruption. This state is often governed by a branch of the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic system. Its job is to mobilize energy, sharpen awareness, prepare the body for action. It evolved to help you survive short bursts of danger. But in chronic anxiety, this system doesn't switch off. It simmers, keeps you just alert enough to be uneasy, just tense enough to grow tired without knowing why. This baseline tension is not a weakness. It's a signal, a message from the body saying, "I've been holding on too long." The anterior insula, the brain's interoceptive hub, plays a crucial role here. It translates bodily states into feelings. It helps you know what you're feeling, even before you have words for it. In anxiety, the insula becomes hyperactive. It overinterprets signals from the body. A flutter in the chest becomes a threat. A skipped heartbeat turns into a sign of doom. The brain, primed for danger, reads even neutral sensations as warnings. This creates a feedback loop. The more your body tightens, the more your brain signals something must be wrong. The more you monitor your body, the more it tenses. And the more tension you feel, the more danger you perceive. It's like trying to drive with your foot on the brake and gas at the same time. You don't move forward, but your system overheats. Sleep often suffers here because rest requires safety. And if your body doesn't know safety, it won't fully let go. You may lie in bed with tired eyes and an alert mind. Or you wake in the night, your heart racing for reasons it can't name. Even when asleep, your nervous system keeps vigil. Dreaming becomes restless. The line between vigilance and rest begins to blur. This is why treating anxiety is not just about calming thoughts. It's about calming tissues, muscles, breath, the felt sense of safety. And yet the paradox is this: many people with anxiety are unaware of their chronic tension. It has become so familiar, it feels normal. Only in moments of deep release, perhaps after crying, stretching, or laughing, do they glimpse what ease feels like. So how do you begin to unwind the body's memory of fear? It starts with noticing. You might check in with your shoulders, your jaw, your abdomen. Are they holding more than they need to? You don't have to force them to relax. Simply acknowledging the tension is the first step. Next comes breath. Not deep, forceful breaths, but gentle ones. A slow exhale signals the parasympathetic system, the body's counterbalance to stress. It invites softening, digesting, healing. Over time, consistent, gentle breathing can shift your baseline. Movement can help, too. Walking, stretching, rocking. These simple motions remind the body it's not trapped, that action is possible, and safety is near. Touch, warmth, and rhythm can also soothe the overactive system. A weighted blanket, warm tea, or slow music. These are not luxuries, they're neurological tools. And if you're in therapy, your practitioner may work with somatic techniques, practices that help bring awareness to bodily sensations, and gently repattern the nervous system's responses. Because healing anxiety is not just cognitive, it's cellular. The body needs to feel what the mind is learning, that the threat has passed. But sometimes the body doesn't believe it yet. That disbelief is not failure, it's residue. It's the echo of months or years spent in readiness. The good news is, nervous systems can rewire, but not through pressure, through presence. So as we move forward, we'll explore how your system became stuck in this hypervigilant state, how repetition, trauma, and habit etched the anxious pattern deep into your neurology, and how understanding that pattern is the first step toward dissolving it. Because you don't need to fight your anxiety, you need to understand how it learned to protect you, and then how to teach it something new. You didn't choose anxiety, but your brain learned it for a reason. Like a vigilant sentinel, it studied your environment, watched for patterns, and made predictions. That's what the brain does. It predicts, then prepares. Some predictions are helpful. They keep you on time, out of danger, responsive to others, but some predictions become rigid, overprotective, mistrustful. They turn every uncertainty into a risk. To understand this, we need to look at a concept in neuroscience known as predictive coding. It's the brain's default strategy, using past experiences to shape present perceptions. Your brain doesn't just see or hear reality, it guesses it, fills in the blanks. Most of the time, this works well. It allows you to move through the world quickly and efficiently, but in anxiety, the predictions lean negative. Your brain starts assuming that unknown equals unsafe. This bias toward danger often comes from experience. If you've lived through moments where the unexpected brought pain, your system remembers, it adapts. It learns that vigilance is safer than calm. That learning gets etched into the circuits we've explored: the amygdala, insula, anterior cingulate, and prefrontal cortex. These regions don't just light up when danger is present, they also light up when danger is anticipated. And here's the catch: the more often they fire together, the stronger the connection. Neurons that fire together wire together, the saying goes. Repetition creates habit, both in thought and in biology. So if your mind frequently anticipates worst-case scenarios, it wires itself to expect them. Over time, this becomes a kind of mental reflex, an unconscious assumption that prepares you for harm. And just like muscle memory in the body, this emotional memory becomes automatic. You feel anxious, not because something is wrong, but because your brain is practicing an old pattern. This is why anxiety can arise in neutral situations, why a quiet moment feels unsettling, why even joy can be tinged with dread because safety feels unfamiliar. Uncertainty has been paired with pain for so long, the system resists peace. This pattern is often invisible to the conscious mind. It operates in milliseconds, below the level of thought, but your body knows it. It reacts, tenses, contracts, because it's not waiting for danger. It thinks it's already arrived. Now consider this. Every time you avoid something because of anxiety, your brain learns. It learns that avoidance equals relief, that retreat equals safety, and so the pattern deepens. This is known as reinforcement, a powerful principle in learning theory. When an action reduces discomfort, the brain is more likely to repeat it, even if that action limits your life. That's how anxiety becomes a loop. Anticipate danger, avoid, feel temporary relief. Reinforce the avoidance, increase sensitivity to future uncertainty, and the cycle repeats. But here's the hopeful part. The same mechanism that created this pattern can also unlearn it, because the brain is plastic. It rewires itself constantly, not just in childhood, but throughout life. This process of unlearning is slow, gentle, and repetitive. It doesn't require dramatic breakthroughs. It asks for consistency, small acts of courage, subtle shifts in interpretation. For example, noticing when a situation is uncertain, but not unsafe. Practicing staying with that feeling, breathing into it, letting the discomfort rise and then fall without reacting. Over time, this exposure changes the prediction. The brain learns, this wasn't dangerous, I can handle it, and that learning sticks. Neurons fire differently, circuits reorganize, the anxious loop begins to fray. This is the basis of exposure therapy, a technique used not to overwhelm, but to retrain. It works not because it removes anxiety, but because it helps you relate to it differently. And behind it all, the prefrontal cortex plays a guiding role. It helps you reappraise situations. It offers a new narrative, one where uncertainty is not a threat, but a frontier, a place of possibility. So the next time your mind jumps to the worst-case scenario, pause, ask gently, is this a prediction or a memory? Often, it's the echo of an old hurt, a story your brain once needed, but may no longer serve. And if that's the case, you don't have to silence the story. just hold it with care. Recognize it. Thank it for trying to protect you. Then offer a new ending. Because while anxiety may have been your teacher, it doesn't have to be your guide forever. In the next section, we'll explore how the stories we carry, especially the ones formed in childhood, shape our nervous system's baseline, and how healing begins by rewriting those stories, not with force, but with compassion. In the architecture of your mind, childhood is the blueprint. Those early years lay the foundation for how your nervous system reacts to the world, for what it fears, expects, and defends against. And in many cases, anxiety finds its roots here. Your brain, in its earliest stages, is a sponge. It learns by mirroring, absorbing, and adapting to the emotional climate around it. If your caregivers were calm and responsive, your system likely learned that the world was mostly safe. But if the environment was chaotic, unpredictable, or neglectful, your brain learned to stay alert, just in case. That alertness becomes a trait, an underlying tone in your daily experience. Like background music, you can't quite turn off. You might not remember specific events, but your body does. It stores impressions, feelings, tensions. These become what some call your emotional baseline, the default settings of your nervous system. Some people grow up with a baseline of calm, others with a baseline of hypervigilance, not because of weakness, but because their survival required it. Imagine walking through life wearing tinted glasses. Everyone else sees the world in neutral tones, but yours are shaded toward threat, ambiguity, caution. That's what anxious programming does. It changes not only how you feel, but how you perceive, and the system gets efficient. The brain learns shortcuts. If this looks like what hurt me before, let's activate defense now. These associations happen fast, bypassing logic. A tone of voice, a glance, an unanswered text, these become signals, not of what is, but of what might be. The anterior insula plays a big role here. It translates bodily signals into feelings. So if you lived in an unstable environment, your body may have spent much of its early life in a low-grade stress response, and that became familiar, even comfortable. Now, in adulthood, when your body enters that same state, even if the threat isn't real, it feels right, not pleasant, but known. This is one reason some people find peace uncomfortable, silence unnerving, joy suspicious. This isn't brokenness, it's adaptation. A smart, protective brain doing its best with what it was given. But the truth is, you don't live in that environment anymore, and your system might be responding to ghosts instead of reality. Recalibrating that baseline takes time. The brain has to unlearn its automatic threat responses. And that's not something you force, it's something you allow. Compassion is the key, not as a vague concept, but as a daily practice, offering yourself the same patience you would offer a frightened child, because part of your nervous system is that child still trying to be safe. So when anxiety rises, consider this. It may not be about what's happening now. It may be the echo of an earlier alarm, reactivated by something small, not a flaw in your logic, but a flashback in your chemistry. This is where therapy, particularly approaches like internal family systems or trauma-informed mindfulness, can help. They invite you to meet those younger parts with curiosity, not shame, to ask, what are you afraid of, and then to listen. Over time, these parts can soften, not because they're dismissed, but because they're understood, heard, valued. When your brain learns that it doesn't have to stay on guard, it begins to rest, and in that rest, new patterns form. The prefrontal cortex, again, plays a central role. It helps distinguish between past and present, between memories and current experience. When you build awareness, you strengthen this region, and with it, your capacity to choose a different reaction. Think of it like building a bridge, from the ancient alarm systems of the limbic brain to the wise, reflective capacities of the cortex. That bridge isn't always solid at first, but every act of awareness, every moment of staying present, adds a plank. And slowly, your emotional baseline starts to shift. The tinted glasses clear a little. The body begins to trust the now. You may still feel anxiety, but it won't define you. It won't control your choices. It becomes one voice among many, not the loudest, not the only one. And from that steadier place, you can begin to ask deeper questions. What do I need now? What does safety feel like? What would peace look like in this moment? Those questions lead us into the next section, where we'll explore how environment and lifestyle shape your emotional regulation, and how simple changes can begin to rewire even the most entrenched patterns of stress. Your environment is not neutral. Every light, sound, smell, and texture around you sends subtle messages to your nervous system. The modern world, with its bright screens, constant notifications, and background hum of urgency, often sends signals of demand, not safety, and your body responds accordingly. For a brain already inclined toward anxiety, this can be a quiet war. The overstimulation doesn't trigger panic necessarily, but it does erode calm. Bit by bit, the baseline tilts toward vigilance, like water wearing down stone. Your sensory systems, especially the thalamus, are constantly filtering incoming data. When your surroundings are cluttered, noisy, or disordered, your brain has to work harder to prioritize what matters. That increases cognitive load, and with it, emotional reactivity. One of the most overlooked contributors to anxiety is decision fatigue. The countless small choices, what to eat, what to wear, how to respond, create mental friction. And when your prefrontal cortex is overloaded, your ability to regulate emotion weakens. That's when older limbic patterns take the wheel. This is where minimalism, not as aesthetic, but as a nervous system strategy, becomes valuable. A calm environment helps your brain know there's nothing to solve right now. It doesn't have to be silence or stillness, but it does require intention. Lighting, for instance, matters. Cool, blue light stimulates alertness. Warm, amber light soothes. Your brain evolved with the rhythms of sunrise and sunset. Disruption of that rhythm, especially through nighttime screen use, confuses the circadian system and suppresses melatonin. This doesn't just affect sleep, it affects emotional regulation. Sound is another factor. Constant background noise, even if you tune it out consciously, keeps your auditory system engaged. The brainstem processes sound before awareness, and certain frequencies can activate stress responses below the surface of your mind. That's why gentle, rhythmic sounds like soft rain or slow music can help reset your system. They send a signal that it's okay to slow down. You don't have to fight or flee here. Scent also bypasses logic. Through the olfactory bulb, it connects directly to the limbic system. That's why certain smells, lavender, cedar, even baked bread, can evoke peace instantly. It's not magic, it's neurology. And beyond the senses, your physical posture shapes your mental state. When you sit hunched forward, your body mimics a defensive stance. Shoulders tight, breathing shallow. But when you relax your shoulders, open your chest, and slow your breath, your brain reads that as a cue. We're safe. This is the essence of bottom-up regulation. Instead of thinking your way to calm, you signal it to your body, and your brain listens. Sleep, of course, plays a central role. Chronic sleep deprivation increases amygdala reactivity and reduces prefrontal control. Simply put, you become more emotionally reactive, less able to pause or reframe. And over time, this compounds into chronic anxiety. Nutrition also affects your neurochemistry. Blood sugar swings, inflammation, gut dysbiosis, all can amplify emotional sensitivity. Your enteric nervous system, often called the second brain, communicates directly with the central nervous system. What happens in your gut shapes how your brain feels. Movement is another anchor, not for aesthetics, but for regulation. Physical activity, especially rhythmic, non-competitive forms like walking, yoga, or swimming, helps discharge excess stress hormones and increases neuroplasticity. Your brain learns better, feels better when your body moves. And nature, it soothes in ways few things can. Not because it's poetic, but because it's what your brain evolved in. Trees, water, open skies. They restore the attentional system, calm the limbic circuits, and elevate mood-regulating neurotransmitters. Even 5 minutes outside can recalibrate your whole inner state. Social environment matters too. The nervous system is relational. Through eye contact, tone of voice, and body language, we co-regulate each other. A calm presence can quiet your anxiety faster than logic ever could. This is especially true in early development, but it continues into adulthood. Your brain is always asking, am I safe here? Am I accepted? And the answer isn't just cognitive, it's embodied. Creating an anxiety-friendly environment then is not about perfection. It's about consistency, gentle lighting, soothing sounds, order in your space, time in nature, restorative sleep, nourishing food, safe connection. These aren't luxuries. They're the soil in which calm can grow. And when you begin tending to this soil, something shifts. Your body starts to trust the moment. Your breath deepens. Your thoughts soften. You're no longer bracing against the world. You're in rhythm with it. From that place you can begin to engage in practices that go even deeper, not just shaping your surroundings, but rewiring your brain itself. Practices that build long-term resilience from the inside out. That's where we go next, into the daily tools of emotional reprogramming. Techniques rooted in neuroscience, gentle enough for anxious minds, yet powerful enough to transform their patterns over time. Your mind is not fixed. Even in the midst of anxiety, your brain retains its extraordinary capacity to change, to adapt, to rewire itself toward peace. This is neuroplasticity, not just a scientific concept, but a profound invitation. It means that with the right tools, practiced consistently, you can reshape the very circuits that fuel your fear. One of the most powerful ways to engage this plasticity is through intentional attention. What you focus on over and over again carves grooves into your neural landscape, just like a stream becomes a river by following the same path. Your thoughts, especially repetitive ones, become more automatic over time. Anxiety tends to create narrow reactive pathways: danger, worry, avoidance, repeat. But you can disrupt that loop by introducing deliberate pauses, by slowing your breath, by noticing the thought without obeying it. These are not just psychological gestures, they create structural change. Take for instance the simple act of diaphragmatic breathing. When you inhale deeply into your belly and exhale slowly, you stimulate the vagus nerve. This calms the sympathetic nervous system and activates the parasympathetic branch, the rest and digest state. Over time, regular breathing practice increases vagal tone, meaning your body becomes better at calming itself. Another powerful tool is interoceptive awareness, the practice of noticing what's happening inside your body without judgment. By bringing gentle attention to sensations, tightness, fluttering, warmth, you teach your brain that these experiences are tolerable. You build capacity. This practice is at the heart of many somatic therapies. It's not about thinking differently. It's about feeling safely, reconnecting with the body, not as a battleground, but as an ally. A place where emotion arises, but doesn't need to dominate. Cognitive reappraisal is another key method. This involves recognizing an anxious thought, identifying the assumption beneath it, and gently offering an alternative perspective. For instance, instead of "this meeting will be a disaster," you might think, "it may be uncomfortable, but I've managed before." Over time, this creates new associations. The prefrontal cortex grows more capable of modulating the amygdala's alarm signals. Thought becomes a tool for regulation. not escalation. Journaling can deepen this process. When you write your thoughts down, especially by hand, you externalize them, you gain perspective, you slow them down. The act itself recruits different brain regions than silent rumination. It invites coherence. Meditation, especially mindfulness-based practices, has shown promise in anxiety regulation, but not because it silences the mind. It rarely does. Instead, it teaches you to observe without attachment, to see the anxious wave rising, peaking, and passing without being pulled under. Even a few minutes a day can alter the brain's default mode network, reducing overactive self-referential thinking. It also strengthens the anterior cingulate cortex, enhancing your capacity for attention and emotion regulation. And for those who find stillness difficult, movement-based mindfulness, like yoga, tai chi, or even slow walking, can offer a gentler path inward. These practices integrate breath, body, and attention. They speak the language of your nervous system. Another tool, visualization. Your brain does not sharply distinguish between imagined and real experiences. When you visualize safety or recall a calming memory in vivid detail, your limbic system responds. The same circuits light up. This can be a refuge, a rewiring strategy. Affirmations, when rooted in truth and paired with emotion, can also help. Not superficial platitudes, but statements that gently counter the anxious script. Phrases like, "I can meet this moment," or "this feeling will pass," can anchor you when practiced regularly. And then there's self-compassion, a skill more powerful than it sounds. When anxiety arises, the inner critic often follows. Why am I like this? What's wrong with me? But that voice only fuels the storm. Instead, imagine saying to yourself what you'd say to a dear friend. It's okay to feel this. You're doing your best. You're not alone. This shifts the tone of your inner dialogue, reducing shame and softening reactivity. The brain responds to kindness. None of these practices are instant. They are not hacks. They are retraining, subtle, layered, cumulative. Like planting a garden, they require time and care. But the harvest is real. And the most important thing is consistency. It's not about doing everything. It's about choosing one or two tools that resonate and weaving them gently into your days. Over time, your baseline shifts. Your reactions soften. You remember again and again that you have agency. From here, we'll move into something deeper still. Not just how to soothe anxiety, but how to understand what it's trying to tell you. Because beneath every anxious signal, there may be a meaningful message waiting to be heard. You've begun to notice the pattern, not just the sensation of anxiety, but the questions beneath it. What is it trying to say? Could this unpleasant feeling actually hold something meaningful? Anxiety, at its core, is not random. It is a signal, urgent, often distorted, sometimes overwhelming, but not without purpose. In many ways, it's your inner system's attempt to protect you, to keep you safe from threat, rejection, failure, or pain. And while these messages are often exaggerated, the intention behind them is ancient: survival. Think of anxiety as a watchtower, scanning the horizon for danger. But over time, especially when shaped by trauma or chronic stress, the system becomes overly sensitive. It begins to mistake shadows for predators, ambiguity for catastrophe. So the task is not just to silence the signal, but to listen, decipher, and recalibrate. This is emotional fluency, a kind of inner translation work. Let's take a closer look. Imagine a wave of anxiety rising in a social setting. You feel your chest tighten, thoughts race, you worry what others are thinking, you want to escape. The surface message might be, "This is dangerous, you're not safe." But beneath that, something softer might be whispering, "You want to be accepted," or "You're afraid of rejection because connection matters to you." That shift changes everything, from threat to value, from panic to care. Anxiety often points to what we care about. The reason your brain reacts so strongly is because it matters. Whether it's performance, relationships, safety, or belonging, your nervous system is trying to protect what you hold dear. So instead of asking, "Why am I anxious again?" a better question might be, "What is this anxiety trying to protect?" Or even, "What need is underneath this signal?" Sometimes anxiety is guarding old wounds, a past humiliation, betrayal, or loss that left a scar. Your brain remembers, even if your conscious mind does not, so it sounds the alarm whenever a similar situation approaches. This is not dysfunction, it is memory, pattern recognition, and while it may no longer be accurate, it is in its own way loyal. Understanding this allows you to meet anxiety with curiosity instead of fear, to move from "make this go away" to "what is this teaching me?" When you do this often enough, something subtle begins to change. The threat loses its grip. Your nervous system starts to trust that you can handle discomfort, that you don't need to run or numb or fight every time it flares. This is what therapists sometimes call working with the signal instead of the noise. Noise is the racing thought, the catastrophic spiral, but the signal is quieter, deeper. It's a pointer to something essential. Sometimes that pointer reveals misalignment, a life path that no longer feels authentic, a relationship that suppresses your voice, a pattern of overwork rooted in old beliefs. Anxiety becomes the red flag, not the enemy. And other times, the signal says you're about to grow, because many anxious moments are simply indicators that you are stretching your comfort zone, that you're on the edge of change. It's like standing at the edge of a cliff, heart racing. You're not in danger, but your nervous system can't tell the difference between falling and flying. The fear is real, but so is the possibility. Understanding anxiety as a messenger rather than a malfunction allows you to reframe your relationship with it. You stop demonizing the feeling and start dialoguing with it. You might try writing a letter to your anxiety, asking it questions, listening for answers, or visualizing it as a character. What would it look like, sound like? What is it afraid of? What does it want for you? This imaginative approach can bring unexpected clarity, and it softens resistance, because when you name and befriend the anxious part, it often becomes less volatile. It trusts you're listening. And that's the irony. The less you fight anxiety, the less power it holds. Acceptance doesn't mean resignation. It means you're willing to feel, to learn, to grow with what is, rather than constantly fleeing or suppressing it. From this place, your sense of agency returns. You're no longer just a passenger tossed by the waves. You become a navigator, steering by the signals, even when the skies are grey. So the next time anxiety arises, pause, breathe, ask, what are you trying to protect? And then listen, not with judgment, but with gentle curiosity, because the road to healing isn't paved with suppression. It's lit by insight, by learning to hear what your body and brain have been trying to say all along. And as we now begin to explore the final leg of this journey, how anxiety can transform into wisdom, you'll begin to see not only the roots of fear, but also the seeds of resilience quietly blooming beneath. Resilience isn't the absence of anxiety. It's your ability to remain present, flexible, and centered, despite anxiety's presence. This is perhaps one of the greatest misunderstandings. Many believe that the goal is to eliminate anxiety altogether. But neuroscience suggests something different. What matters most is not how rarely anxiety appears, but how skillfully you respond when it does. This skill, this inner capacity to stay grounded in the face of internal turbulence, is what shapes resilience. And it doesn't arise from force or denial. It grows through repeated experiences of meeting discomfort and surviving it, rewiring your nervous system to realize, I can feel this and still be okay. Resilience in the brain is about flexibility, emotional flexibility, cognitive flexibility, even physiological flexibility. It begins in the prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason, strategy, and foresight. This region helps modulate the raw emotional signals coming from deeper brain structures like the amygdala. When functioning well, it acts like a compassionate parent, soothing the alarm bells and offering perspective. But resilience doesn't mean suppression. It means integration. The prefrontal cortex doesn't silence the amygdala. It collaborates with it. It listens to the alarm, checks the evidence, and decides whether action is needed or if reassurance will suffice. In someone with high resilience, this circuit is well practiced. The brain recognizes early signs of dysregulation and quickly engages its calming pathways. Breathing slows, muscles release, perspective widens. It's like watching a storm roll in and knowing you've built a strong shelter, not to avoid the weather, but to face it with stability. You can train this. In fact, every moment of anxiety is an opportunity for practice. Start with awareness. Notice the signal. Instead of reacting impulsively through avoidance, rumination, or tension, pause. Then engage a technique that calls on your parasympathetic nervous system, the body's natural brake pedal. This might be a deep exhale, a grounding touch, a whispered reminder, I am safe right now. Each time you do this, you reinforce a different neural pathway. You teach your brain a new story, not of collapse, but of calm in the midst of intensity. Over time, this process reshapes the landscape of your inner world. You don't just survive the anxious wave, you learn to surf it. And here's the subtle power of this shift. Resilience doesn't just reduce suffering, it increases access to joy. When anxiety is no longer a barrier, you show up more fully. You say yes to the party, the conversation, the opportunity. You live less from fear and more from curiosity. Resilience opens the door to trust. Not blind trust that nothing bad will happen, but embodied trust that you can handle what arises. And this self-trust is magnetic. It changes how others see you, how you lead, how you love, because you're no longer trying to control everything, you're dancing with it. Let's return briefly to the brain. One of the key players in this dance is the anterior cingulate cortex. Remember, the region involved in detecting conflicts and integrating emotion with cognition. Studies suggest that increased activity and connectivity in this area supports adaptive emotional regulation. It helps you flex between different emotional states, making it easier to shift from stress to calm or from overwhelm to clarity. In other words, it's not about being calm all the time. It's about recovering more quickly, finding your footing when emotions pull you off center. And even deeper still, resilience is shaped by your relationship with uncertainty. Anxiety often arises when the future feels unpredictable, but resilience teaches you to stay with that uncertainty without needing to solve or escape it, to breathe through the unknown, to sit with the question marks. This is a radical act in a world obsessed with control, but it is also freeing. Because when you stop needing certainty, you start discovering strength. You no longer shrink from challenge, you lean in, grounded and alert. This is the quiet confidence of someone who's been through storms and knows how to stand in the rain. And it's this kind of confidence born from experience, from repeated practice in the face of discomfort, that becomes a reliable anchor in your daily life. You'll still feel anxious. That's human. But you'll also know, this won't break me. I've met this before, and I can meet it again. So let your resilience grow, not in defiance of anxiety, but alongside it, as a response to it, as a dance with it. Because when you can hold discomfort with presence, you begin to uncover the deeper gifts anxiety hides, the truths it points to, the courage it calls forth, the clarity it makes possible. And in the next section, we'll begin exploring those gifts, not as distant ideals, but as real qualities you already possess, waiting to be reclaimed. There's a hidden intelligence within your anxiety, a kind of encrypted message from the deeper parts of your being. And once you learn how to listen to it, a new form of clarity begins to emerge. This is what we now explore, the wisdom within anxiety. Anxiety often arrives as tension, unease, or restlessness. But beneath these surface sensations lies a signal, something in your life that might need attention, realignment, or reflection. It's like a lighthouse flashing in the fog. Uncomfortable, yes, but potentially life-saving if you know what to look for. In neuroscience, anxiety is linked not only to survival, but also to prediction. Your brain constantly anticipates the future, scanning for potential dangers. But this same circuitry, when regulated, also underlies planning, foresight, and creative problem-solving. So the same system that can trap you in worry can also guide you to deeper insight. Think of it like this. Anxiety is often a smoke signal, not always from fire, but perhaps from friction, a misalignment between how you're living and what you deeply value. When your actions, thoughts, or relationships contradict your inner truth, anxiety might be the whisper or the scream that something's off. This is where the prefrontal cortex again becomes essential. When activated with intention, through reflection, mindfulness, or guided questioning, it helps decode the signal. Ask yourself, what is this anxiety trying to show me? Not to pathologize it, but to translate it. What expectation is clashing with reality? What truth am I resisting? What am I being called to change? Sometimes the anxiety is about boundaries, unspoken needs that are constantly being crossed. Other times it reveals a deeper longing, an unlived life knocking at the door of your awareness. And often anxiety appears as a mask. Underneath there might be grief or guilt or an unmet yearning, something that never had space to be fully felt. This is why avoidance, while comforting in the short term, blocks the deeper gift. It silences not just the discomfort, but also the message within. But when you pause, breathe, and turn inward with gentle curiosity, something powerful happens. You start to reconnect with your own emotional compass. This shift from suppression to listening is subtle but profound. It's like tuning an old radio, slowly reducing the static until the signal becomes clear. And as clarity arises, so does agency. You realize you're not just a victim of emotional weather. You can respond, you can act, you can adjust. Maybe the job you dread every morning isn't just stressful, it violates your values. Maybe that chronic social tension is pointing to a mismatch in belonging. Maybe your insomnia isn't just physiological, it's a symptom of something unspoken during the day. In this way, anxiety becomes a portal, not a prison. It's your body's invitation to deeper alignment. Your nervous system telling you there's something here that matters. And when you respond to that call, not with panic, but with presence, you begin to move toward integrity. This doesn't mean you can always eliminate the source of anxiety. Some circumstances are fixed, at least for now, but what you can change is how you relate to those circumstances. For example, reframing your thoughts, known as cognitive reappraisal, activates the prefrontal cortex and reduces amygdala reactivity. Simply asking, what else might this mean? Or is there another way to see this? Engages different pathways in your brain. It's like updating your internal GPS with a new route, less fear-driven, more resourceful. Over time, this practice rewires the brain. It creates new associations between anxious cues and empowering responses. And slowly, your baseline state begins to shift. You might still feel nervous before a presentation, but now it feels like focused energy, not paralyzing dread. You might still wake up with unease, but now it reminds you to check in, not check out. This is the power of inner work grounded in neuroscience. You don't just cope with anxiety, you transform your relationship to it. And as that relationship deepens, so does your self-awareness. You begin to distinguish between false alarms and true guidance. You trust yourself more. You feel less at the mercy of the unknown, because now the unknown is not an enemy, it's a space of possibility. Anxiety will still visit. It always will. But you'll meet it differently, not with fear, but with questions, not with resistance, but with readiness. And in the next section, we'll explore how this emotional fluency, this growing attunement to your inner landscape, can become a foundation for lasting calm, confidence, and even joy. As you become more fluent in reading the language of anxiety, a new capacity emerges, emotional regulation. This is not about suppressing how you feel, nor about being perfectly calm all the time. It's about developing a gentle but firm ability to guide your inner state, even when the world outside feels unstable. Your nervous system, like a musical instrument, responds to how it's played, and the brain's circuits of regulation, especially in the prefrontal cortex, can learn to tune your reactions. With practice, you can shape your emotional responses, not through willpower, but through repeated, mindful attention. Think of it as cultivating a new reflex, one where instead of spiraling into panic or shutting down, your system pauses, breathes, and reorients. Slowly your baseline shifts. Your body begins to remember what safety feels like, not just in theory, but in sensation. And this is key. Regulation begins in the body. Before the thoughts, before the stories, your autonomic nervous system is setting the stage. If it perceives danger, even falsely, the mind follows with matching thoughts. But if you send signals of safety through breath, posture, or presence, you can change the script. Let's break this down. One of the most accessible ways to regulate anxiety is through the breath. Slow, rhythmic breathing, especially exhaling longer than you inhale, stimulates the vagus nerve. This in turn activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch responsible for rest, digestion, and repair. It's like pressing a biological calm button. Not instant, but reliable. Breathing this way tells your brain it's okay, we're not in danger, and over time this begins to recondition the fight or flight circuits. They become less trigger happy, more discerning. Another powerful tool is grounding. Anxiety often lives in the future, in what might go wrong, in what hasn't happened yet. Grounding brings you back to the now. Feel your feet on the floor, the weight of your body, the coolness of air on your skin. These are not just mindfulness cliches, they're direct ways to bring the prefrontal cortex back online, to interrupt the looping predictions, and bring attention to what is. And then there's naming. When you name what you feel gently, precisely, you engage language centers in the brain that reduce limbic system overactivation. It's a process known as affect labeling, simply saying, I feel anxious, or more subtly, there's a jittery energy in my chest, begins to shift your state. Why? Because it creates space between you and the feeling. It transforms an overwhelming wave into a named experience, something you can observe, work with, breathe through. Together, breath, grounding, and naming form a triad, a stabilizing foundation for emotional regulation. But regulation also involves what you do after the anxious moment passes. This is where reflection matters. Ask, what triggered that? What belief was I holding? What part of me needed support? These are not interrogations. They're invitations to self-compassion, to understanding the roots of your reactivity. Because often anxiety is layered. The current event might be a spark, but the fuel often comes from the past. Unprocessed memories, old wounds, internalized fears. Regulation then becomes a form of reparenting. You're offering your nervous system what it didn't always receive. Safety, presence, reassurance. And the more you practice, the more your system learns that it doesn't need to react to every discomfort as a crisis. It learns the difference between alert and alarmed, between engaged and overwhelmed. Over time, the pathways between your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala become stronger. What once triggered panic now elicits curiosity. What once felt unbearable now becomes workable. This is not a miracle, it's neuroplasticity. The brain is not static, it changes with experience. And each time you regulate, each time you breathe instead of bracing, name instead of numbing, you are teaching your brain a new way to live. Eventually, the moments of calm grow longer. The anxious episodes become shorter, less frequent, and even when they return, you meet them with greater kindness, greater skill. You remember this too, is a wave, and I know how to float. And from this foundation of regulation, something even more powerful begins to emerge, resilience. The deep inner knowing that whatever comes internally or externally, you have the capacity to respond, not perfectly, but faithfully, with steadiness, clarity, and care. In the next section, we'll explore how this resilience is not just reactive, but creative. How your nervous system, once trapped in loops of fear, can become a wellspring of courage, joy, and authentic connection. Resilience is often misunderstood as sheer toughness, or an ability to endure pain without flinching. But in the context of anxiety and the brain, resilience is something quieter, softer, more fluid. It's the capacity to bend without breaking, to be present with difficulty without being consumed by it. It arises not from force, but from flexibility. At the neurological level, resilience is built on the adaptability of your networks, especially the balance between emotional centers, like the amygdala and insula, and regulatory hubs in the prefrontal cortex. When this balance is strong, your system can rise to meet challenge without collapsing into chaos. Think of resilience like a sailboat on unpredictable waters. Anxiety may stir waves, even storms, but the resilient system adjusts its sails, steadies the rudder, and maintains direction. It doesn't need perfect weather. It learns to move with the wind, not against it. This ability to move with life, rather than resist its rhythm, begins in the nervous system, specifically in your capacity to recover, to return to baseline after a stressor. And this recovery isn't just about getting over it. It's about how your brain recalibrates safety, how it reestablishes balance. Several mechanisms contribute to this. First, neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself. Every time you meet an anxious moment with calm, every time you regulate instead of react, you strengthen a new pathway. The connections between fear centers and regulation centers shift. Some grow quieter, others become more robust. Second, emotional integration. Resilience doesn't mean avoiding difficult emotions. It means metabolizing them, letting them move through you, rather than become stuck within. When you allow sadness, fear, or uncertainty to be felt, truly felt, they no longer need to control you from the shadows. This is a physiological process, as much as an emotional one. Emotions are waves of activation, chemical, electrical, muscular. When you allow them without resistance, the wave completes. The nervous system learns, I can feel this and survive. Third, meaning making. Your brain is a pattern seeker. When you reflect on your experiences, when you find threads of insight or purpose in your struggles, your system encodes those memories differently, not as raw threats, but as sources of growth. This isn't about false positivity. It's about seeing the complexity of your experience. Painful, yes, but also instructive. Resilience deepens when your story includes both the suffering and the strength. And then there is connection. Resilience doesn't develop in isolation. The brain is wired for co-regulation, for feeling safe in the presence of others. When someone truly sees you, hears you, stays with you in your anxious moments, without trying to fix or flee, you heal. These moments of attunement, whether in friendship, therapy, or family, reshape the nervous system. They create new associations, from aloneness to belonging, from danger to safety, from shame to dignity, and slowly the brain updates its map of the world. What once felt overwhelming becomes familiar. What once triggered avoidance now invites curiosity. Your identity begins to shift from someone who has anxiety to someone who knows how to work with it. This is the heart of resilience, not the absence of fear, but the presence of inner capacity. The knowledge that fear may arise, but it does not own you. It is a visitor, not a dictator. You might even begin to see anxiety as a kind of signal, imperfect, yes, but pointing to where care is needed, where your system still holds old stories, unprocessed memories, or unspoken needs, and with each signal a choice to react or to respond with presence. With this growing self-awareness, you become the steward of your nervous system. You learn when to rest, when to challenge yourself, when to seek support. Your life becomes less about avoiding triggers and more about expanding your window of tolerance. And here, something beautiful happens. Freedom. Not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, steady kind. The freedom to go for a walk without fear of panic, to speak in a meeting without spiraling, to rest deeply, to love fully, to show up to your life, not as a prisoner of your past, but as a participant in your present. Resilience doesn't mean you'll never feel anxious again. It means that when anxiety arises, you meet it with grace. You have tools, you have memory, you have space between stimulus and response. And over time, this changes everything. As we move into the next section, we'll explore how resilience matures into agency, how your nervous system becomes not just a site of healing, but a foundation for creativity, purpose, and meaningful choice. Agency is the quiet revolution that follows resilience. Once the chaos of anxiety begins to settle, and the mind no longer flinches at every uncertain sound, a new energy emerges, not one of vigilance or fear, but of participation, a readiness to engage, to shape, to decide. You begin to realize you are not just the subject of your experiences, you are also their author. In the neurobiology of agency, several regions come into sharper view. The prefrontal cortex, especially the dorsolateral and medial regions, becomes more active, not in the frantic attempts to suppress fear, but in its higher roles, planning, evaluating, imagining. These are the areas involved in goal setting, value alignment, and conscious choice. Think of agency like standing in a room, once ruled by static and noise, and now, slowly, you can hear your own voice in the silence. You can sense your preferences, your aspirations, the gentle pulse of your will. This doesn't mean life becomes easy, but it becomes navigable. Agency is the moment you choose to go for the walk, even though anxiety whispers, "Stay home." It's choosing to speak the truth in a moment where silence used to protect you. It's noticing the old fear rise and still taking the next step. In neurochemical terms, this shift often involves a recalibration of the brain's reward system. Where once avoidance brought relief, now engagement brings a deeper satisfaction. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with motivation and reward, begins to spike not from escape, but from effort. The brain, over time, relearns what feels good, and that changes everything. This process of reclaiming agency is not linear. There will be setbacks, days when fear feels louder again. But the difference is this: you remember that you can respond, that you have tools, awareness, and above all, the choice not to collapse into old patterns. And agency isn't just about doing. It's about recognizing your own influence, internally and externally. You start to see that you can shape your emotional state, not by forcing it, but by nurturing the right conditions. Like tending a fire, you don't yell at the flame to burn brighter. You offer fuel, you clear space, you protect it from harsh wind. In daily life, this may look like creating rhythms that soothe your nervous system, gentle routines, nourishing sleep, time in nature, movement that connects rather than punishes, conversations that deepen, not distract. It may look like setting boundaries, not as walls, but as invitations to healthier interactions, or like practicing mindfulness, not as a performance, but as a quiet return to presence. Each of these acts reinforces your internal locus of control, the sense that you are not merely reacting to life, but co-creating it, that your experience is not dictated solely by emotion, but also by intention. And here lies one of the most beautiful paradoxes of healing. The same brain that once spiraled into anxiety can become the soil for clarity, strength, and creativity. Because agency is not the absence of vulnerability. It's the presence of choice within vulnerability. This also means you can begin to dream again, not in the fantastical sense, but in the grounded, intentional way. Your nervous system, no longer hijacked by constant threat, has energy to spare for connection, contribution, curiosity. You begin to ask different questions. Not just, how do I stop the fear? But what kind of life feels meaningful to me now? This reorientation is subtle at first, but it grows. You notice yourself making plans, not just to avoid anxiety, but to move toward something, toward learning, toward purpose, toward joy. And in that movement, something else awakens, trust. Trust in your own capacity, in your system's ability to hold intensity without breaking, in your mind's ability to return again and again to balance. This is the terrain of post-anxiety growth, not merely surviving the storm, but learning to build a life in its aftermath, a life shaped not by trauma, but by values, by what matters most. And so with each act of agency, each small choice to align your behavior with your deepest intentions, you reinforce those neural pathways, you strengthen the synapses that support engagement, calm, courage. This rewiring happens slowly, but it is powerful. Over time, your identity evolves. You are no longer just someone who copes with anxiety. You are someone who acts, who creates, who contributes. And this sense of purpose becomes an anchor, a deeper why, something anxiety can't touch. So as we prepare for the final section, let this truth settle in you. Your brain is not broken. It is adaptable, sensitive, resilient, and within it lies a capacity not just for regulation, but for meaning, for direction, for profound agency. Healing is not the absence of discomfort, but the integration of it. And in this final stage of our exploration, what arises is something quieter, deeper, and more enduring than even agency. It's equanimity. Equanimity is not the same as calm. It's not about always feeling relaxed or serene. Rather, it's the ability to remain inwardly balanced amidst the full spectrum of experience. It is the wisdom of knowing that storms pass and that you are not the storm. In the brain, this quality is cultivated through patterns of regulation, reflection, and perhaps most powerfully, awareness. The prefrontal cortex, through repeated engagement with mindful attention, begins to modulate not just fear, but also craving, rumination, and reactive impulse. The anterior cingulate cortex, so often lit up in anxiety, finds new pathways toward curiosity rather than control. And the insula, the mirror of your inner world, begins to report signals not only of tension, but also of comfort, gratitude, peace. Equanimity is a long game. It's built over thousands of moments where you notice your mind grasping and you gently let go, where you feel the rise of fear and breathe through it, where you hold sadness not as something to fix, but as something to honor. With practice, you no longer believe every anxious thought. You no longer chase every signal of danger. You create space between stimulus and response, and in that space, a different self appears. Not the self shaped by trauma or avoidance, Not the self driven by the need to manage every possible outcome, but the self that simply is, open, grounded, awake. This kind of presence does not require perfection. In fact, equanimity welcomes imperfection. It softens the edges of self-judgment. It invites kindness, first toward your own nervous system, and then outward to others. And here we find perhaps the most powerful insight in the neuroscience of anxiety, that anxiety is not a flaw, it's a signal that something needs tending, understanding, care. When you stop resisting the signal and start listening to it with wisdom, it transforms. What was once noise becomes guidance. What once felt like weakness reveals itself as sensitivity. What once led to hiding becomes a doorway to connection. Equanimity also means making peace with uncertainty, knowing that life will not always give you answers, but that you can meet each question with a steady heart. It's choosing to inhabit this moment fully, even if the future remains unknown. And that is the ultimate reframe. Anxiety, once the harbinger of imagined catastrophe, becomes the ground on which you build deeper strength, a strength that bends, flexes, adapts, but doesn't break. As you lay here, body heavy, breath softening, you've now walked the full circle of anxiety, from its roots in the ancient brain to its ripple effects in thought, body, and behavior. You've seen its adaptive origins, its distortions, and the paths that lead back to clarity. More than anything, you've learned that the mind is not your enemy, that anxiety is not your identity, that within your neural architecture lies not only survival circuitry, but also the blueprint for peace. So let yourself feel it now, not the absence of emotion, but the gentle presence of balance, the stillness that arrives when nothing needs to be different. The storm has passed. The nervous system begins to rest, and you, the conscious witness, are free to drift into quiet sleep, not because you've escaped life's dangers, but because you've learned how to meet them. This is equanimity. This is the final gift of understanding anxiety, and it is yours. Now that you've journeyed through the deep landscape of anxiety, gently allow your thoughts to settle, like dust particles floating in a quiet room. Your ideas, your feelings, your memories, they all begin to slow. No more questions to answer, no more problems to solve. Your breath moves softly now, in and out, like the ebb of a calm sea. Each inhale invites in rest. Each exhale lets go of what's no longer needed. Your body, once alert, begins to loosen. Your limbs grow heavier, warmer. Your heart beats gently, steadily, as if whispering, "You're safe now." Notice the spaces between thoughts, the widening gaps of quiet. This is where peace lives. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't ask for silence. It simply invites you to be fully, gently here. Your nervous system, that wise protector, begins to retreat into rest mode. The circuits of vigilance fade into stillness. Muscles release, eyelids soften, jaw unclenches, and the mind, once spinning, now floats. There's nothing more you need to do. You've seen the mechanisms. You've walked through the chemistry, the patterns, the roots. You've named the fear. You've understood the storm. And now, with the weight of knowledge turned into lightness of being, you can sleep. Let your breath be the rhythm that carries you away. Let your heartbeat be the drum of safety. Let your body melt into the support beneath you. The world can wait. The mind can rest. You are home inside yourself. Sleep now. Sleep deeply. Sleep knowing you are whole.